Hello everyone, this will be my review for the book Shadow of the Gods. I know everyone already has their Shadow of the Gods review out. That's because I forgot to apply for an e-arc, and also I wanted to read it in the hardcover. I needed that new book smell, you know? And I gotta say, the hardcover is gorgeous, so worth it. So, let's talk Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. What did I like? What didn't I like? Who would I recommend it for? And is it a good place to start John Gwynne? And I think it pretty clearly is a good place to start John Gwynne. There is no connection with his other world. So you can start with Malice, or you can start with this. Totally up to you what you do. I'll be comparing it to Malice throughout this, and you can kind of get an idea on what you would rather start with. And there, it's not like A Time of Dread, which should be read after The Faithful and the Fallen. So, what did I like about this book? Well, John Gwynne gets into it pretty quickly. It was almost jarring after reading a bunch of Rain Wilds and some slower books this week, how it's like, how fast the inciting incident happens. And, like almost every Gwynne book, it's paced extremely well, where it doesn't feel like it ever stalls out. That's kind of, it's probably paced better than Malice. Malice is actually the only John Gwynne book that kind of took a little bit to get into. This book is also very action-packed, as most Gwynne books are, and John Gwynne is obviously very, very good at writing action, in that it really kind of feels like you're in the action scene. He's not quite my favorite action writer, but he's up there. And if I ask someone, oh, who's your favorite action writer, and they say John Gwynne, I'm not going to have any questions, because that totally makes sense. I think the only thing I sometimes find for like his action is that it feels like some people, like if 7 people are involved, it sometimes feels like 3 of them are moving in slow motion, for our protagonist to not die. But I seem to be the only one who has with this. And in general, John Gwynne is an S-tier action writer. And also, something I have said every time when talking about John Gwynne is the man's consistency in making point of views interesting is ridiculous. He's written a lot of point of views at this point. Over 20. At some point, I'll actually count them. And I don't dislike reading about a single one. I have never gotten to a chapter in a John Gwynne book and gone, not a POV from this person, like I just don't care about this person. That literally has not happened, which is, I can't say that about any other author. The only other series I can say that about is Dresden, because it's all from Dresden's point of view. Actually, that's true for Live Ship as well. Whatever. It's 8 books in, and that's true. That's a pretty ridiculous stretch, especially when Faithful and the Fallen, like, I think Wrath had 12 point of views or something. So it's not like he's low on point of views. Only 3 in this, but I really like all 3. And the next question is, what is it about? So our 3 point of views are, we got Orca, who is a somewhat retired person, it seems like, from violence, who's kind of got a family going on. And she is very inclined towards violent and direct solutions. She's very much a fan of, if you've got a problem, you need to get somewhere, people you don't like are in the way, kill all of them except one, then get information from the last. That's her plan a lot. It's not exactly, as the people in this book say, it's not exactly deep cunning, but it's effective through sheer force of will. I've seen her compared to John Wick a lot, and yes, that is a valid comparison. It's an extremely valid comparison. I'd also compare her to Tao from Rage of Dragons. She's not quite as angry as Tao is. She's also not as selfish as Tao is, especially at the beginning of the Rage of Dragons. But she's got the sheer will, is what she kind of gets through on, and doesn't exactly rely on complicated problem solving, which is actually one thing I like more about The Faithful and the Fallen, is it kind of has more maneuvering. It still has a lot of action, but it relies more on maneuvering. The problems that come up and their solutions tend to be much more straightforward in the Shadow of the Gods and solved a higher percentage just through more straightforward murder. And less through maneuvering and scheming. And less of the problems are based on this person has schemed and maneuvered their way into a position of power. And it's more, I want to kill that person. And they don't want to, and they're going to try and kill me because they don't want me to kill that person. Which is one thing I found slightly less interesting about this than The Faithful and the Fallen. And it's one reason The Faithful and the Fallen is still my favorite John Gwynne series, because I thought that was done really well in that series, and it's just not here as much. And the next character, who also has an inclination of solving problems with murder, is Varg, who is an escaped thrall, who really, wants to kill some people, which all three people who are POVs want to kill some people. But Varg maybe the most wants to kill some people. The other people kind of want to kill some people as a secondary goal in order to accomplish the main thing they want to accomplish. Varg's main goal is vengeance, and so he wants to murder, and he ends up in a John Gwynne kind of military group brotherhood. And if there is one thing John Gwynne is good at, it is writing the bonds of friendship between military groups. If you've read any John Gwynne, you know he's consistently very, very good at this. And arguably my favorite part of the series is almost just of the books was people talk. No, probably the end. Anyways, he's very good at this, of having a group of people who are bound together because they chose to fight on the same side. And they would, put their life in the way to protect the others. And it's something he's extremely good at writing very consistently, from Malice through all the Faithful and the Fallen, through all of A Blood and Bone, and into The Shadow of the Gods. And Varg, like Orca, John Gwynne in general, he's very good at getting me immediately interested in characters. I think in terms of amount of time to get me interested into characters, there's very few people who get me interested faster than John Gwynne. In general, he hasn't quite hit the peaks of investment as some of my favorite authors, but he kind of hits the state where I am invested and interested in characters almost instantly, very consistently, and that was true as Varg as well, who was also a pretty distinctive character from Orca and Elvar. I will say I kind of struggled with remembering the names in this series, just because there's a lot of Viking-related names. Obviously, I haven't mentioned this somehow, but it's inspired on Norse mythology, which I think everyone knows before they read this. So if you've watched any reviews of this, unless this is the first thing you're seeing about this book, which I guess it might be, it's inspired on Norse mythology, and John Gwynne clearly did his research. I really would like a glossary for this book. We got a map, which is something. I like having maps, so we got a map, but I would really love, after the map, for there to be a glossary of all the terms. Because there were some, and I kind of, you kind of figure it out. It's not a big deal, but I still like it sometimes to be able to flip and kind of see the glossary of what the words mean. I think there was one on, the ebook, but it'd be nice if that was included on the hardcover for book 2. So John, if you see this, or if either of John's sons see this, I know they're active on BookTube and have a great channel, please convince your dad to add a glossary to book 2. I would like one. Thank you. I think he overestimates my memory if he thinks I'm going to remember what all these words mean. Anyway, it actually, I will say, even without a glossary, he was pretty good at getting me to learn what the words mean without info dumping. So I think that part was handled very well. So we went into a lot of work to not have to have a glossary, because I was actually very rarely confused about what people were talking about, even though there's a lot of words involved that I think most people aren't gonna know what they mean. So yeah, he actually handled that aspect very well. I'm going to go, again, to a slight con. This is a nitpick at this point, and that is, in almost every John Gwynne series, there's been bits about how everyone feels fear and bravery isn't not feeling fear, and is acting despite the fear. And I have to say, there's kind of 2 passages in this book about that felt kind of like an unnatural conversation, where it just feels like they said that because John Gwynne wanted to say that, compared to, I think, the best delivery of the same theme was probably in A Time of Dread. But that's like 2 scenes. But it did feel a bit tacked on for me, and I was kind of like, all right, are they really saying that, or are you saying that, John? I don't know. Anyways, that's a bit of a nitpick. And then the only other thing that I'm going to give my last thing that kept this from being among my favorite Gwynne books, and actually it's one of the Gwynne books I like less than most of them, even though I really like the book. John set a high bar for himself. And I'm not as big of a fan of this as I am of Faithful and the Fallen or A Time of Dread. I like this more than Malice, the first book in Faithful and the Fallen, which I think is his weakest book. But so far, my favorite first book in any of his series is A Time of Dread. Anyways, and that's that. In his other 2 series, there were unantagonists or antagonists plural that I felt a deep and personal hatred for. Like, if I saw Lycos walk down the street, I would have to restrain myself from just murdering him. And there are some characters in this book who I can, like, from an outside be like, okay, this is clearly a bad person, but there is no one who I would risk jail time to kill if they were a person in real life, which is not true for his other 2 series, and I think it's probably just one reason why I enjoyed them a little bit more. But there are also aspects that I think he does in this book better than any book he's done. And the biggest one I would say is the world building. The world building in this is, I think, easily the best of any book he's written. It feels very distinctive and unique. It's clearly based on Norse mythology, but it's also not just like a carbon copy. Like, he didn't just, go to Norse mythology, highlight, Control-C, and then Control-V. He made it. He did a really good job of making it his own, and I'm a big fan of the world building this, and I think when the trilogy is done, I think this will easily be the best world building he's done. And I think from what I've seen in terms of hype, this is probably going to be his series that gets the most traction. So I'm a little bit disappointed that I think so far I like his other 2 series more, but it's still really good. And another thing is his prose has just continued to get better as he wrote. He does, I think, a really good job in this book of his descriptions relying on every sense. Even as the Fantasy Network pointed out, a lot of things smell like urine in this book. People are not peeing in places that are a good place to pee. People are just peeing on the ground because everything smells like urine. But not just urine. He does a really good job of describing, of setting the scene with multiple senses and not just visually. And I think in general, someone I think would be hard-pressed to argue that from a prose standpoint, this isn't his best book yet. He's gone from Malice, where I thought his prose was kind of below average among the fantasy books I was reading, but not enough to bother me. And now he's gone to here, where I think for fantasy, prose is clearly above average. So I think that's been clear and steady improvement. Especially, I think, there were some parts of Malice that were somewhat clunky, and this basically was never clunky. And the other thing I would like to appreciate, I yell at people when they do this badly, so I need to give him praise. Chainmail is effective in John Gwynne books, which, I mean, it better be, considering he's wearing chainmail in his photo about John Gwynne, but chainmail is actually stopping things. And I really appreciate that, because one thing I said, everyone knows that a lot of fantasy has been derivative of Tolkien, and one thing it seems like no one copied from Tolkien is how effective chainmail was in Lord of the Rings, because Aragorn had chainmail, and it was really effective armor, and Gwyn here is the guy who actually kept that from Tolkien, which I know most of you will not care how effective chainmail is in your armor, but it really bothers me when chainmail is just like easy to go through. He specifies riveted mail every time someone is wearing mail. I know most of you aren't going to know, but basically, if you buy a cheap chainmail replica, or if you see on like Deadliest Warriors or some test for chainmail, if you see stuff just like go through it like paper, that's because it's butted mail, where the chain links are just kind of pushed together. Riveted mail is what people would actually wear if they wanted to stop sharp bits of metal from entering them, and it's riveted together. So when you stab it, the rings don't just split apart easily. So on one hand, I like that he specified it because he's kind of like acknowledging, like, yeah, this chainmail in my book, it's real chainmail. But it's also true that, like, there'd be no need to specify because in reality, no one would wear butted mail to a battle. Like, all that it would be is be heavy and maybe trick the person into thinking you were wearing actual useful protection. But I think it's really funny that John Gwynne, like, specifically called it riveted mail. I'm picturing him in his head while writing it, kind of going like, yeah, other authors, chainmail, it's riveted mail, it's effective. So maybe everyone else, after reading this, will be like, oh, what does riveted mail be? They will Google it, and the results will tell them how effective chainmail is. So anyways, John, I appreciate that chainmail is effective in your books. It's great. I'm a big fan. Please continue to do that. I love that it's riveted mail and not BS butted mail, which is useless. This book review has turned into a rant about chainmail. Well, frankly, if you expected me to stay on topic for an entire video, I honestly don't know why you're still here. I'm not known for staying on topic. But anyways, final thoughts for the Shadow. I didn't even talk about Elvar. Not final thoughts. So Elvar, also a big fan of Elvar. Elvar is the person who kinda used to be a noble, but has instead joined the Battle Grim, which is another mercenary band. And Elvar has, at first I kind of get annoyed with people when their main motivation in a book is like glory or battle fame. But I think I didn't get annoyed with it for Elvar. And there's a conversation in this book where someone is kind of like, who cares about battle fame? Like, yeah, you want to be remembered, you should be worried about, like, family and stuff like that. And Elvar points is kind of like, this is the family I chose, who I kind of choose to live with, and we don't protect each other because of genetics. We trust each other with each other's lives because of the experiences we've been in, and it's kind of, it's a different kind of bond. And I loved that part of the book. And it actually, I'm normally, like, I find, in general, characters whose, like, primary motivation is, like, oh, I want to be famous, I just kind of roll my eyes at them, and I thought Elvar was sufficiently well written that I didn't do that, and it's a rare instance of me liking that type of character. So Elvar was kind of, based on premise, the underdog on how much I would like her, and I think she probably is I don't know, it's always hard to pick my least favorite Gwyn character, because as I said, I'm never disappointed to get to a certain person's chapter. I guess she's probably my least favorite of the three. I think for the first half I liked Varg the most, and then maybe Orca took over. But I like all three, they're pretty close. Anyways, Elvar's also great. But now, moving on, final thoughts for Shadow of the Gods. I enjoyed reading it. I was never bored. It was paced fantastically. Has a really interesting world. I like all the characters. There's also some side characters who, I think after reading as many John Gwynne books as I have, like, I can kind of tell when someone's gonna be a POV in the next book. So there was one character who we, like, in Elvar's point of view, who we got some backstory for, and I'm like, you're gonna be a point of view character in the next book. And then there was I'm not gonna say names because of how much John Gwynne kills people, so I don't want to tell you that someone lived through to the end. There was one death in here that, if you've read John Gwynne, was, like, completely predictable. I was like, I said in the Discord chat while I was reading it, when I was on, like, page 80, I was like, this person's chances of making it to the, like, halfway point is effectively 0%, and they didn't make it to the halfway point. But obviously I'm not going to say who it is, but, I mean, if you've read John Gwynne, I will say he kills characters. There is a little bit of a pattern to how he kills characters, so I'm starting to get better at predicting it. So he didn't really shock me with any in this book. He did get me in A Time of Courage, though, so I'm expecting him to get me in this series. But the biggest character death I kind of saw coming from a mile away. But but for that reason, I not going to say names for who I think will be point of views in the next book because I want you to be worried about them dying. Anyway, that is what I got for The Shadow of the Gods. I gave it an 8.1 out of 10, which would be a really good rating for most authors and is a little bit disappointing for John Gwynne just because of the high standard he set. But I gotta say, here's one thing. The setup for the next book was pretty incredible. I had 3 pages left, and I thought this rating was going to be lower, because with 3 pages left, I was like, there's no way in hell he can wrap this up in 3 pages, and it's going to be a satisfying end. And I gotta say, those last 3 pages were really productive pages. I keep going past when I said the words final thoughts, but I don't care. And they had there's a reveal, a couple in this book, that are exactly the type of reveals I love, in that they're incredibly, the foreshadowing, like once you see it, all the foreshadowing that you've read like scrolls through your mind, and I start yelling at myself that I didn't see it coming, but also I didn't see it coming. And they're my favorite types of reveals because it's like, it's obvious that it was true for the entire book. It's not like the author did it just to surprise you. And it was super well set up. And I gotta say, despite my doubts 3 pages in, this wrapped up to a satisfying conclusion with 3 very productive pages at the end. It went from, I thought there was going to be cliffhangers for multiple point of views, and it somehow wrapped up both of them in 3 pages. So I really like the ending of this book. John Gwynne's kind of known for his pretty wild endings, and this definitely lived up to it. Anyway, I think, let me know what you thought of The Shadow of the Gods. Seems to be almost all positive from what I've seen, which is good because John Gwynne deserves the love. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Bye, everybody.